The Catherine ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. Ambassador Valkyra stood on the bridge, her skin shifting through calm blue patterns as she studied the third planet from the yellow star. This would be her 247th first contact mission. She expected it to go like all the others. The Galactic Confederation had been exploring the stars for 47,000 cycles. 89 different species had joined together in peace and cooperation. The Catherine had been among the first, and they had personally welcomed 63 new civilizations into the fold. This latest discovery, a species calling themselves humans, would be 64. The humans had only just developed radio technology. Their electromagnetic signals had reached Confederation space 3 cycles ago. The messages were primitive, but showed promise. Mathematics, basic science, attempts at communication. Standard markers of a species ready to learn they were not alone in the universe. Begin standard approach protocols, Valkyra said to her crew. Broadcast friendship signals on all frequencies. Let them know we come in peace. Her second officer, Tekvar, nodded and began the transmission sequence. They had done this so many times that every movement was automatic. Approach slowly. Broadcast peaceful intentions. Wait for the new species to respond. Establish communication. Begin cultural exchange. The human response came faster than expected. Within 1 of their hours, electromagnetic signals flooded toward the Catherine ship. Valkyra's translation computers worked quickly, parsing the alien language into something she could understand. Welcome, the message said. We are humanity. We are so happy you have come. But we are also afraid. Valkyra's skin patterns flickered with confusion. Afraid? She knew that word from the database. It appeared constantly in human transmissions. Their entertainment broadcasts were full of it. Their literature spoke of it endlessly. But the Confederation scholars who had studied the preliminary data could not quite understand what it meant. The Catherine had caution, of course. They had risk assessment. If a building was unstable, they avoided it. If a chemical was toxic, they did not consume it. If a weapon was pointed at them, they took defensive action. But this thing the humans called fear seemed to be something more, something that affected them even when there was no immediate danger. Why are you afraid? Valkyra transmitted back. We mean you no harm. We come as friends. The reply took longer this time. When it came, Valkyra sensed hesitation in the careful words. We are afraid because we do not know you yet. We are afraid because our world has many stories of first contact going wrong. We are afraid because this is new, and humans fear the unknown. But we are still happy to meet you. We want to be your friends despite the fear. Despite the fear. Valkyra filed that phrase away for later analysis. It seemed contradictory. If they were afraid, why not simply wait until they had more information? Why feel an emotion about something that had not happened yet? The first meeting took place on neutral ground, aboard the Catherine ship. 3 human representatives came up in a primitive chemical rocket. Valkyra watched them arrive with interest. They wore bulky protective suits and moved carefully in the artificial gravity. When they removed their helmets, she saw their faces. Their eyes were wide. Their breathing was rapid. Strange moisture appeared on their skin. The lead human, who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chun, extended her hand in what the database indicated was a greeting gesture. When Valkyra touched the human's hand, she noticed it was shaking slightly. Are you experiencing a medical problem? Valkyra asked with concern. Your physical symptoms suggest distress. Sarah Chun laughed, another human behavior that still puzzled the Confederation. No, I'm fine. I'm just nervous. This is the biggest moment in human history. My heart is racing. I'm terrified I'll say something wrong or accidentally offend you. Why would your cardiovascular system respond to social concerns? Valkyra asked. That seems inefficient. Sarah looked at the other humans, then back at Valkyra. You don't feel fear, do you? Your species doesn't experience it at all. We are not certain what you mean by the term, Valkyra admitted. We evaluate risks logically. We take appropriate precautions. But this physical reaction you are having, this emotional state that seems to affect your decision-making, we do not have an equivalent. The humans exchanged glances again. Sarah spoke slowly, carefully. Fear is what kept our ancestors alive. When a predator was hunting them in the dark, fear made their hearts beat faster, made their muscles ready to run or fight. It gave them energy to survive. Even now, when we face something unknown or dangerous, our bodies and minds react the same way. But there is no predator here, Valkyra pointed out. There is no immediate danger. Why does your body respond as if there is? Because we evolved on a world where danger could come at any moment. Another human, Admiral Marcus Webb, said. His voice was rough, and his body language suggested what the database called defensiveness. Our world was full of things trying to kill us. Big animals with sharp teeth. Poisonous plants. Other humans who wanted our resources. We learned to be afraid of everything until we knew it was safe. Valkyra tried to imagine such an existence. The Catherine homeworld had been peaceful. They had evolved as a species without significant predators. Their intelligence had developed from social cooperation, not from avoiding death. The same was true for most Confederation species. They came from worlds where survival had not required constant vigilance. How do you function in daily life? Tekvar asked. If you are constantly experiencing fear responses, how do you make logical decisions? Sarah smiled. We learn to manage it. We learn which fears are useful and which are not. A fear of heights might keep us from falling, so we keep it. A fear of meeting new people might hold us back, so we learn to push through it. That's what courage is. Feeling the fear and doing it anyway. The conversation continued for hours. The humans tried to explain their emotional landscape, and the Catherine tried to understand. Valkyra learned about anxiety, terror, dread, and dozens of other variations of fear. She learned that humans wrote entire stories meant only to scare each other, that they sought out experiences that made them afraid for entertainment. It was baffling. But the humans were clearly intelligent, clearly capable. Their fear had not stopped them from developing technology, from building civilizations, from eventually reaching for the stars. If anything, Sarah suggested, their fear had driven them to accomplish more. We knew we might be alone in a hostile universe, Sarah said quietly. That thought terrified us. So we built bigger telescopes, better ships, stronger signals. We reached out because staying alone was scarier than the risk of what we might find. When the meeting ended and the humans returned to their planet, Valkyra filed her report with the Confederation Council. She recommended accepting humanity as a provisional member. They were strange, these humans with their racing hearts and sweating palms and bodies that betrayed their emotions. But they were also smart, creative, and eager to join the galactic community. The Council approved the application. Humanity would be welcomed into the Confederation. They would receive technology, knowledge, and protection. In return, they would contribute their own unique perspectives and abilities that no one questioned what use a species driven by fear might be. After all, the Confederation had existed for 47,000 cycles without it. They had explored vast regions of space, defeated diseases, solved countless problems, all through logic and cooperation. Fear seemed like a curious evolutionary quirk, nothing more. An interesting footnote in the biological diversity of the galaxy. It would take a war to show them how wrong they were. The attack came during humanity's third cycle as members of the Confederation. Earth had been peaceful, prosperous even. Human scientists worked alongside alien researchers, Human artists shared their work across a dozen worlds. Human children learned alongside Catherine youth, though the teachers still struggled to explain why human students sometimes felt test anxiety. The warning arrived too late. A small Confederation outpost on the rim of known space sent a desperate transmission. Ships were coming. Organic ships, grown instead of built. They moved wrong, fought wrong, wanted things that made no sense. Then the transmission cut off. Admiral Webb was on Earth when the news reached the Confederation Council. He was in a meeting with other human military advisors, discussing integration protocols, when Ambassador Valkyra appeared on the communication screen. Her skin patterns were rapid, chaotic. Webb had learned to read Catherine emotions over the past 3 cycles. Valkyra was experiencing something close to confusion, perhaps even distress. "Admiral Webb," she said, "we need human observers at the council session immediately. Something has happened. Something we do not understand." Webb and his team took the next transport to Confederation Prime. By the time they arrived, 6 more outposts had gone silent. The news was spreading through the Confederation like a virus. For a civilization that had known 47,000 cycles of peace, the sudden loss of contact was deeply unsettling. The council chamber was full when Webb entered. Representatives from all 89 species were present, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, light patterns, and spoken words. The translation systems worked overtime to keep everyone synchronized. "The enemy has taken 12 worlds now," a Quillian delegate was saying. Its feathers rippled with what might have been agitation. "Our defense fleets engage them, and our fleets die. We do not understand their tactics. They make no logical sense." Webb leaned toward Valkyra. "What exactly are we facing?" She brought up a holographic display. Webb felt his stomach tighten as he watched the footage. The enemy ships were nightmares made real. Massive organic structures that pulsed and writhed. They moved through space like deep-sea creatures through dark water. When they attacked, they opened up to release thousands of smaller organisms that swarmed defending ships like piranhas on a wounded animal. But worse than their appearance was their behavior. The footage showed a Confederation defense fleet engaging the enemy with textbook precision. Perfect formations, optimal firing solutions, coordinated retreats when shields fell below acceptable thresholds. Everything by the book. The enemy ignored the book entirely. They charged straight into defensive fire. They rammed ships when weapons would have been more efficient. They sacrificed vessels in ways that gained no tactical advantage. 70% casualties to destroy a single Confederation cruiser. It made no sense, except it did. Webb felt the cold recognition in his gut. He had seen this before in human history, in the desperate charges of cornered armies, in the fanatical attacks of soldiers who believed death was preferable to failure, in the animal kingdom, in wounded predators that became more dangerous as they weakened. "They're using fear as a weapon," Webb said quietly. The entire council chamber went silent. Every translator caught his words. Every species turned their attention to the human delegation. "Explain," the council prime said. It was a Velkaran, an ancient species of crystalline beings who spoke through resonance. Webb stood, knowing that every word mattered. "These ships, these organisms, they evolved to hunt. Look at their attack patterns. They broadcast on psychic frequencies, trying to induce panic. They move erratically to create confusion. They sacrifice themselves in suicide runs because in their natural habitat, prey that saw such behavior would freeze or flee. But our forces do not freeze or flee," Valkyra said. "The psychic broadcasts have no effect on us. We continue to fight logically." "Exactly," Webb said. "And that's why you're losing. You're fighting like these tactics should make the enemy retreat. You're waiting for them to realize the cost is too high. But they're not going to retreat. They evolved to hunt prey that panics. When you don't panic, when you just stand there and fight by the numbers, you're acting exactly like cornered prey. You're making yourselves targets. The chamber filled with confused communication. The concept was clearly difficult for many species to grasp. A Takari representative spoke up, its tentacles forming complex shapes. Are you suggesting we should panic? How does that improve our tactical position? No, Webb said firmly. I'm saying you need to understand what these creatures are. They're predators. They expect prey behavior, fear responses. When they don't get it, they keep attacking because they don't know what else to do. But humans, we evolved with predators. We know how predators think. Another world fell while they debated. Then another. The enemy was accelerating, moving deeper into Confederation space. They were heading toward major population centers now. Worlds with billions of inhabitants thought the Confederation fleets engaged them at the Epsilon Nexus. It was meant to be the line that could not be crossed. Every available warship, every weapon system, every tactical advantage the Confederation could muster. The logical thing to do would be to defend the Nexus at all costs. But the enemy didn't fight logically. They threw themselves at the defenses in waves that should have broken. Each wave died, but each wave got a little closer. The Confederation commanders kept waiting for the enemy to acknowledge the futility. They never did. The Nexus fell in 18 hours. The emergency session that followed was the first time Webb saw actual panic in Confederation behavior. It manifested differently than human panic. No screaming, no running. But there was a frantic quality to their communications, a desperate searching for answers that were not coming. We have lost 40 worlds, Council Prime announced. Trillions dead. Our projections show complete Confederation collapse within 20 cycles if this continues. We have tried every tactical approach, every weapon system, every defense doctrine. Nothing works. Valkyra looked at Webb across the chamber. Her skin patterns were doing something he had never seen before, a rapid strobing between dark colors. If a Catherine could feel fear, he thought that might be what it looked like. You said humans understand predators, she said. You said you evolved alongside them. Can you help us? Webb felt the weight of that question. Humanity had been the junior members of the Confederation. The species that needed help, needed protection, needed guidance. Now suddenly every eye and sensor and attention was focused on him and the handful of other humans in the chamber. We can try, Webb said. But you need to understand something first. To fight predators, you need to understand fear. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. You need to know what it feels like when something is trying to kill you. You need to know the panic, the terror, the desperate need to survive. We do not have that capacity, a Quillian delegate said. Our biology does not allow for such responses. Then you need to learn, Sarah Chun spoke up. She had been silent until now, but Webb saw the determination in her eyes. You need to understand why fear exists, why evolution created it, what it does and how it helps survival. Because right now, you're defenseless against an enemy that weaponizes it. Council Prime resonated with a sound like shattering glass. What do you propose? Webb looked at Sarah, then back at the Council. Let humanity fight. Let us show you what fear taught us. How to recognize predators, how to counter them, how to become something they can't hunt. There was a long silence. You are asking us to put our survival in the hands of our newest, least advanced members, a delegate said. I'm asking you to trust the species that learn to live with fear every single day of our existence, Webb replied. The species that looked at animals bigger and stronger than us and decided we would hunt them instead. The species that turned our own fear into a weapon more powerful than claws or teeth. Another world fell. The alert came through during the debate. Another trillion souls gone. Valkyra stood. I move that we authorize human military intervention. Immediately. The vote took less than a minute. It was unanimous. Webb nodded slowly, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline that came before battle. His heart rate increased. His palms began to sweat. His body prepared itself for violence in ways that would have baffled the aliens around him. "Where do you need us?" he asked. "Thalmora," Council Prime said. "It is a world of 6 billion. The enemy will reach it in 2 days. Our fleets cannot hold them." "Then we will," Webb said. He hoped he sounded more confident than he felt. Because the truth was, he was terrified. His species was about to go to war against an enemy that had crushed the combined might of 89 civilizations, but humans had been terrified before. They had been terrified when they huddled in caves, listening to predators prowl outside. They had been terrified when they faced armies and plagues and natural disasters. Fear had been humanity's companion since the beginning. And humanity had learned long ago that being afraid did not mean you had to lose. It meant you had to fight harder. The human fleet arrived at Thalmora 30 hours before the enemy. 200 ships, pulled from every military outpost humanity had established since joining the Confederation. It was not an impressive force by galactic standards. The Confederation had sent thousands of ships to earlier battles and lost them all. Admiral Webb stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiant, watching the planet rotate slowly beneath them. 6 billion Takari lived down there, their tentacled forms going about their daily lives, not knowing that their world was about to become a battlefield. Evacuation was impossible. There was not enough time, not enough ships. "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez said from the tactical station, "Confederation observers are requesting permission to monitor from our ships. They want to see how we fight." "Granted," Webb said. "Put Ambassador Valkyra on my bridge. She should see this up close." Valkyra arrived an hour later. Her skin patterns were still showing those rapid dark pulses that Webb had started to think of as Catherine anxiety. She moved to stand beside him, looking at the tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy fleet. "You have so few ships," she said quietly. "The enemy has hundreds. Their harvest vessels alone outnumber you 3-1. "I know," Webb said. "I've read all the battle reports. I know what we're facing. Then why are you here? Logically, you should retreat. Preserve your forces for a battle you can win." Webb smiled without humor. "That's the difference between us. You see a battle you can't win logically. We see a battle we have to win anyway. 6 billion lives down there. We don't have the luxury of logic." The enemy arrived on schedule. Their ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge, a swarm of organic horror that made Webb's skin crawl. Even on the tactical display, even reduced to icons and numbers, they looked wrong. Like something that should not exist in the clean vacuum of space. "They're broadcasting," the communications officer reported. "Psychic frequencies. Same as before. Designed to induce panic and paralysis." Around the bridge, the human crew reacted. Heart rate spiked. Breathing quickened. Some people went pale. Webb felt it too, a primal wrongness that made every instinct scream to run. "Status?" he asked, his voice steady despite the ice in his veins. "All stations operational," Rodriguez reported. Her hands were shaking slightly on her console. "Weapons ready. Engines ready. Crew ready." "They're afraid," Valkyra observed. "Your crew?" "Their biological signs show extreme stress. Should they not be relieved from duty?" "They're fine," Webb said. "They're doing their jobs. Fear doesn't mean inability. It means awareness." He opened the fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Webb. I know you're scared. I'm scared too. Those things out there, they're nightmares made real. They want us to freeze. They want us to run. They evolved to hunt prey that does exactly that when terrified. He paused, looking at the enemy fleet growing larger on the display. But we're not prey. We're humans. We're the species that learned to be scared of the dark and then invented fire. We're the species that looked at creatures 10 times our size and decided to hunt them with sharpened sticks. We're the species that felt cosmic dread when we looked at the stars and went there anyway. So yes, be afraid. Let that fear make you sharp. Let it make you fast. Let it make you dangerous. And then let's show these things what happens when they try to hunt humanity. The enemy fleet began its approach. Standard pattern, according to the Confederation reports. The harvest ships stayed back while the smaller hunter organisms swarmed forward. Thousands of them, each one the size of a fighter craft, each one grown specifically to kill. The Confederation observers on human ships watched the tactical screens with confused patterns. The human formation was wrong. Ships were spaced too far apart. No overlapping fields of fire. No mutual support protocols. It looked like disorganization. It was not. It was fear-informed tactics, the kind humanity had learned fighting each other for thousands of years. Give each ship room to maneuver. Let captains make split-second decisions. Trust in chaos because rigid formations were predictable, and predictable meant dead. The hunter organisms hit the human line like a tidal wave. On the Confederation ships, commanders would have held formation and trusted in their defensive calculations. The human ships scattered. The frigate Relentless dove under the swarm, rolled inverted, and came up firing. The destroyer Vengeance accelerated straight into the thickest concentration. Point defense systems screaming, taking hits, but trading one human ship for 20 enemy organisms. The cruiser Indomitable fought like its name suggested, never stopping, never slowing, even as atmosphere vented from a dozen hull breaches. They're not following doctrine, Valkyra said, her patterns striving wildly. Every ship is acting independently. There's no coordination. There's plenty of coordination, Webb said. But it's reactive, not planned. Every captain out there is scared and making decisions based on instinct and training. That's what makes it work against an enemy like this. The psychic fear waves intensified. On the bridge of the Defiant, Lieutenant Okafor at the weapons station let out a small sound of distress. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely hold the controls. Lieutenant, Webb said calmly. Status? Targeting systems operational, she managed. Her voice shook. I have firing solutions on 3 harvest ships. But sir, I can't stop shaking. I can't make my hands work right. That's the fear, Webb said. It's making your reflexes faster. Your mind sharper. Trust it. Trust yourself. Okafor took a shaky breath and fired. The targeting was perfect, better than anything she had done in simulations. Her fear-heightened senses caught micro-adjustments that her conscious mind could not have calculated. 3 harvest ships took critical damage. Across the fleet, the same thing was happening. Terrified humans fighting with a precision born from adrenaline and desperation. They made mistakes, yes. Ships were lost. Good people died. But they adapted faster than any logical military force could. They learned from each engagement and changed tactics immediately. The enemy had never faced prey that did this. Their psychic weapons worked, fear responses were triggered, but the prey kept fighting, kept adapting, kept killing. The battle raged for 3 hours. The human fleet took devastating casualties. 60% of their ships were destroyed or critically damaged. But the enemy took worse. The harvest ships, unused to significant resistance, proved vulnerable when faced with opponents who fought harder the more afraid they became. Captain Morrison on the Indomitable was one of the last to fall. His ship was falling apart around him, systems failing, hull integrity at zero. The logical thing would have been to evacuate. Instead, he aimed his dying ship at a harvest vessel. "If we're going down," he transmitted on the open channel, "we're taking as many of you bastards with us as possible." The Indomitable's reactor went critical on impact. The harvest ship died with it. Morrison and his crew of 200 were gone, but they took 5,000 enemy organisms with them. Valkyra watched it happen and felt something she had no words for. A tightness in her chest. A racing of her circulatory system. The beginning of something her species had never known. "They should have retreated," she said. "They should have saved themselves." "They saved the planet instead," Webb said quietly. "That's what fear taught us. That sometimes the scary thing and the right thing are the same thing. And you do it anyway." The enemy began to pull back. For the first time in their recorded history, they retreated. They had lost too many organisms. The harvest was costing more than they could gain. And the prey was wrong. Afraid but dangerous. Terrified but lethal. The remaining human ships pursued. 78 vessels out of the original 200, most of them damaged. They should have let the enemy go. They should have been satisfied with survival. Instead, they chased like wolves scenting blood. "No mercy," Webb ordered. "We teach them right now that humans are too expensive to hunt. We make them afraid of us." The enemy fled the system entirely. The human ships returned to Thalmora, battered and bloodied, but victorious. 6 billion to carry were safe. The cost had been high. 40,000 human lives. But they had won. Valkyra stood on the bridge of the Defiant as the planet's government transmitted their gratitude. Around her, the human crew was exhausted, traumatized, still shaking from the adrenaline crash. But they had done it. They had faced impossible odds and won through sheer desperate courage. "I think," Valkyra said slowly, "I am beginning to understand fear. I watched Captain Morrison die. I watched those ships fall. And I felt something. My body responded. My mind raced with scenarios of what could go wrong." "Is this what you feel all the time?" "Not all the time," Webb said. "But when it matters, yes. When the stakes are high and the odds are bad and doing nothing is not an option. That's when fear becomes useful. That's when it makes you better than you knew you could be." Valkyra looked at her own appendages. They were trembling slightly. Her skin patterns were chaotic. For the first time in her species' history, a Catherine was experiencing something close to fear. And with it, something else. A determination to act despite that fear. "Teach us," she said. "Teach all of us. The Confederation needs to learn what you know. How to fight when you're afraid. How to win when logic says you should lose. How to be brave." Webb nodded slowly. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. If you're ready to learn that, then we'll teach you. But understand that once you learn to be afraid, you can't unlearn it. Your species will be different forever." "Good," Valkyra said, and her patterns finally stabilized into something that might have been resolve. "We have been incomplete. We have been children playing in a safe garden. It is time we grew up. It is time we learned what the universe really is. The war was not over. The enemy still held dozens of worlds. But something had changed. For the first time, the Confederation had hope. And that hope came from the species they had thought to protect. The fearful humans who had taught them that sometimes terror was not a weakness. Sometimes it was the only thing that could save you. The war continued for 6 more cycles. But everything had changed after Thalmora. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the lecture hall on Confederation Prime, looking out at the strangest class she had ever taught. 200 alien military officers from 40 different species, all here to learn about fear. Catherine, Takari, Quillians, Valkarin, and dozens of others. Species that had never experienced the emotion now trying to understand it. Fear is not your enemy, she said, beginning the lesson she had given 100 times now. Fear is information. It tells you that something matters, that there is danger, that you need to be alert. The key is learning what to do with that information. She brought up images on the display. Human children playing hide and seek. Soldiers training for combat. Athletes preparing for competition. Scientists presenting groundbreaking research. We train for fear from childhood, she explained. Those children playing, they are learning to manage the stress of being found, of competing, of taking risks. By the time we are adults, we have spent our entire lives practicing what to do when we are afraid. Officer Tekvar, the Catherine who had been at the first contact meeting so long ago, raised the manipulator appendage. But how do we practice something our biology does not produce naturally? You simulate it, Sarah said. You put yourself in stressful situations. You learn to recognize the physical symptoms. Racing heart, rapid breathing, tunnel vision. Then you learn to function anyway. The Confederation has started developing training programs based on human military methods. Live fire exercises, time tests, high-pressure decision-making scenarios. She paused, looking at the assembled officers. Some of your species are beginning to develop fear responses naturally. Exposure to human concepts, to our media, to our way of thinking, it's changing you. The Catherine especially. You're developing what you call pattern dread. Tekvar's skin patterns shifted. Yes, I experience it now. When I consider potential threats, my body responds. My circulation increases. My thoughts race. It is uncomfortable. But also, I find myself more prepared, more alert. I understand now why evolution created this response. The Confederation military had been restructured. Human tactical advisors worked alongside alien strategists. Logical Catherine planning combined with human instinct for asymmetric warfare. The psychic species learned to recognize stress responses and use them. The analytical species incorporated concepts like morale and fighting spirit into their calculations. Most importantly, they learned to embrace calculated risk. The Confederation had always fought conservatively, minimizing losses, retreating when logic dictated. Humans taught them that sometimes you had to take the scary option. Sometimes you had to charge into danger because the alternative was worse. The combined fleet practiced new doctrines. Ships training together, learning to fight with organized chaos. Confederation crews learning to make split-second decisions. Human captains teaching alien officers that rigid plans failed when the enemy did the unexpected. Admiral Webb watched the training exercises from the command center, Ambassador Valkyra beside him. The Catherine's patterns had changed permanently over the past cycles. She showed anxiety now, especially before major operations. But she had learned to channel it. We are ready, she said, watching the fleet maneuvers. As ready as we can be. Then it's time to end this, Webb said. We've been on the defensive long enough. We know where the enemy is staging their forces. The Void Nebula. We hit them there. We can finish this war. The assembled War Council agreed. 60% Confederation ships, 40% human. A complete reversal from the beginning of the war. The human vessels were no longer the protected juniors, but the veteran shock troops that others learned from. The fleet gathered at the rally point. 5,000 ships representing every species in the Confederation. The largest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. Webb and Valkyra stood together on the bridge of the new flagship, appropriately named Fearless. How do you feel? Webb asked her. Valkyra's patterns pulsed with dark colors. Wrong, uncertain, My body is telling me to recalculate, to find a safer approach. My mind keeps showing me all the ways this could fail. That's fear, Webb said gently. Welcome to the experience. But you asked me how I feel, not what I fear, Valkyra said. I feel determined. I feel angry for all the worlds we lost. I feel responsible for the lives depending on us. Are these also products of fear? In a way, Webb said. Fear makes everything sharper. It makes what matters stand out more clearly. You're learning what humans have always known. That being afraid and being brave are not opposites. Bravery is being afraid and acting anyway. The fleet entered the Void Nebula in battle formation. The enemy was waiting. Their staging ground was massive, hundreds of harvest ships and millions of hunter organisms. They had gathered here to launch their final assault on the Confederation core worlds. Instead, the Confederation had come to them. The psychic fear waves hit immediately. Stronger than ever before, a tsunami of induced terror meant to paralyze entire fleets. And for the first time, it worked on the Confederation forces. Not fully, not like it would have worked on prey species, but enough. Enough that ships hesitated. Enough that formation integrity wavered. Enough that every crew member felt the cold grip of genuine fear. On the Fearless, Valkyra's entire body locked up for a moment. Every pattern went dark. Her mind filled with visions of failure, of death, of her entire civilization burning. This was what humans felt. This terrible certainty of doom. Valkyra, Webb said calmly. Are you with me? She forced herself to move. Forced her patterns to light again. Yes, I am afraid. I am more afraid than I have ever been. But I am still here. Then let's do this, Webb said. He opened a fleet-wide channel. All ships, this is Admiral Webb. I know you're feeling it now. Real fear, for maybe the first time in your lives. Your bodies are screaming at you to run. Your minds are showing you every nightmare scenario. That's what the enemy wants. They evolved to create this feeling. They mastered it. The enemy fleet began its approach, confident in their psychic weapon. But here's what they don't know, Webb continued. Here's what they can't understand. Fear does not mean defeat. Fear means you understand the stakes. It means you know what you are fighting for. Every human in this fleet has felt this way before. And we learned that the only way past fear is through it. So feel it, acknowledge it, and then fight anyway. The fleets met in the heart of the nebula. The enemy swarmed forward with their usual tactics. Suicide runs. Overwhelming numbers. Psychic attacks that should have paralyzed their prey. But the prey had changed. The Confederation forces felt fear now, but they had learned from humanity. They used that fear. Let it heighten their senses. Let it sharpen their decisions. Let it fuel their determination. The K-3 cruiser Resolve took heavy damage early in the battle. Captain Tekvar felt his new fear response triggering, his body preparing for flight. But he had trained for this. He had learned from humans. He knew fear was just data, and data could be used. All power to weapons, he ordered. We advance. The Resolve pushed deeper into the enemy formation, taking hits but dealing more damage than it received. Tekvar was terrified. His entire crew was terrified. But they fought with a desperate efficiency that would have been impossible before they learned to be afraid. Across the battlefield, the same story played out. Takari ships coordinating with the frantic energy of fear-driven focus. Quillian fighters making aggressive maneuvers that logical doctrine would have forbidden. Valkyran capital ships standing their ground against impossible odds because retreating was scarier than fighting. The humans taught by example. They showed the others what courage looked like. What it meant to be so afraid you could barely function and yet still pull the trigger, still give the order, still push forward. The battle raged for hours. Ships on both sides fell. But something fundamental had changed. The Confederation was not fighting with cold logic anymore. They were fighting with hot determination, with desperate courage, with the knowledge that some things were worth dying for. The enemy had never encountered this before. Prey that felt their fear weapon and fought harder because of it. Prey that became more dangerous when cornered. Prey that had learned from humanity what predators had never imagined possible. That fear could be strength. The enemy broke first. Their harvest ships began retreating. Their hunter organisms scattered. For a species that had never known defeat, that had always been the hunters, the sudden role reversal was devastating. They fled into dark space, back to whatever distant realm they had come from. The Confederation fleet did not pursue. They had won. The cost had been terrible. Thousands of ships lost, millions dead. But they had won. On the bridge of the fearless, Valkyra stood trembling. Her patterns were chaos. Her body was in full fear response. But she was smiling, if a Catherine could smile. "We did it," she said. "We were afraid, and we won anyway." Webb nodded, feeling the familiar exhaustion that came after battle. That's the human way. Feel everything. The fear, the doubt, the terror. And then do what needs to be done regardless. The return to Confederation Prime was triumphant. But the real changes were just beginning. The galaxy had learned about fear, and it would never be the same. The Confederation established the Institute of Survival Studies, with Sarah Chun as its first director. Here, all species could learn about fear, about courage, about the emotional architecture that had kept humanity alive on a dangerous world. It became mandatory training for all military personnel and recommended for anyone in high-stress professions. More than that, fear was spreading naturally through the Confederation. Exposure to human culture, to human concepts, to the idea that you could feel afraid and act anyway. It was changing alien psychology. Species were developing their own versions of anxiety, stress responses, anticipatory dread. Some found it uncomfortable, but most found it valuable. Fear made things matter more, made choices clearer, made survival feel earned rather than assumed. A cycle after the final battle, Webb and Valkyra stood together at a memorial on Thelmara. It honored all those who had died in the war, human and alien alike. Hundreds of names carved in dozens of languages. "My species is different now," Valkyra said. Her patterns showed something complex, a mix of emotions that would have been impossible before. We feel fear. We experience anxiety. We worry about the future. Some say you have taken our peace from us. And what do you say? Webb asked. I say we were never at peace. We were simply ignorant of danger. Real peace is not the absence of fear. It is having the courage to face fear and build something good anyway. Our patterns stabilized into something warm, something almost human. You taught us to be afraid, but you also taught us to be brave. I think that is a fair trade. Webb looked up at the monument, at the names of 40,000 humans who had died at Thalmar alone, at the millions of Confederation citizens who had learned too late what fear meant. Fear is a teacher, he said quietly. Sometimes the lesson is hard, but it's necessary, because the universe is not safe. It never was. At least now you know that. At least now you can prepare. Will they come back? Valkyra asked. The enemy? Maybe, Webb admitted. But if they do, you'll be ready. You'll know fear, and you'll know what to do with it. The Confederation thrived in the cycles that followed. Not because fear had made them weaker, but because it had made them more complete. They understood now what humanity had always known, that survival required more than logic. It required the willingness to face the darkness and fight anyway. The galaxy had learned to be afraid, and in learning to be afraid, it had learned to truly live, to truly choose, to truly be brave. Humanity's gift to the stars was not technology or science or art. It was the understanding that courage meant nothing without fear to overcome. That safety meant nothing if you did not know what danger felt like. That peace was something you fought for, not something you assumed. The Confederation's new charter, written in the aftermath of the war, contained a human saying that every species now understood. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. And every species in the galaxy, having learned to be afraid, now also had the chance to be truly courageous. The humans had shown them how, not by removing fear, but by teaching them what to do with it. In the end, that made all the difference.